Good evening. This is Deidre with Are You a CPS Victim Like Me? I have a guest that is going to be talking for this evening, and she will introduce herself in a second, which is Gina. I also have my two co hosts supporting me again this evening, which is Darren, the CPS Punisher, and Tiffany. And basically, anybody watching the show from the past, as oh, let me mute this. I apologize. Um,
You were yelling at me.
Anybody that has watched this show in the past kind of knows the format and knows a little bit about my story and the fact that I was a victim of CPS and still fighting to get my children home. And hopefully they will be home sometime soon, my two older boys. But in the meantime, I do this platform to kind of get the word out there to other parents that might not know the corruption that's behind CPS and give them knowledge to maybe prevent them from losing their children. So again, I'm going to have Gina introduce herself and how she's been affected in different ways with CPS and her platform website that she does as well, that is linked to mostly domestic violence, but of course that goes hand in hand with children and CPS as well. So with further ado, I will go ahead and introduce you, Gina, and let you speak and have the floor.
Thank you so much, Deidre. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about what I know and what I've researched regarding domestic violence and the involvement with CPS at times when restraining orders are called, when restraining orders are put into place, sometimes by one party to gain the upper hand in child custody. And one of the things that I've learned in my research is that, and I believe you guys have talked about it before, is that whoever gets to the courthouse usually gets the upper hand as far as child custody is concerned, and she's very right on that. So I'm going to start with my Sweet Corner Girl. I started Sweet Corner Girl about 3 or 4 years ago after I had an incident of a stalker in my building who was stalking me around the house, and it kind of triggered me to what I experienced in my marriage, domestic abuse. And so one of the things that was said to me by this stalker was I belonged in a mental hospital, and just, you know, disturbing things that he was doing, such as waking me up in the middle of the night. We shared a common area, but we had separate rooms. We never had a relationship or anything like that. And it triggered me to remember what I experienced with my domestic violence. And one of the things that was said to me by my ex-husband in front of the guardian ad litem when we were going through the dissolution was, by the time he was done with me, I was going to be walking the street corner. I was going to be working the street corner. So I, had done some research. I had gone to back to college, and I got my degree in criminal justice with an emphasis on domestic violence, victimization, and offender rehabilitation. And, with my focus being on domestic violence, I was reading a lot of what had been happening for the past 30 years as far as research was concerned. And I wanted to name my nonprofit Street Corner Girl, but I had talked to my daughter, and she says, "Why would you want to name it something that was so horrifically said to you?" And she was right, and I couldn't. I thought about it for several days, and it just came to me one night, I'm going to name it Sweet Corner Girl. So what I did was I named my nonprofit Sweet Corner Girl, and it was basically to try to give a different perspective about what women experience, especially when a lot of what women have experienced in child custody matters is the accusation of being unstable. That is something that I found in my research that was mostly assigned to women. And it does stem from our patriarchal society where women were once property. Women and children were once property of men. And a lot of the domestic violence coin words and what have you didn't start appearing until the 80s and 90s. And so it was not something that was researched. It was not something that was talked about because women were still made to be kept in line by the family or by their husbands, and by society in general. Women had their place. My generation was probably the first generation, and I come from uh, Generation X. I'm on the cusp of the baby boomers, and then I start with 1965, which is Generation X, and we're probably the first group of individuals who started to speak out about abuse. Before that, it was more of a uh, children should be seen and not heard type of environment for women and children. And so, you know, those words for domestic violence and any research really was not. If anybody says that there was research, it's really not true. It's a small percentage of maybe some therapist who worked with children or something, or women, and maybe had a private study, but there was nothing on the widespread that sometimes we are being told. What I did find in my research when I was studying for my degree was I found that the Department of Justice and the National Institute of Justice did do a comprehensive research on actual court cases of domestic violence. And what they did find was that most of the reports that are made for domestic violence, um, there's sometimes, because they're not investigated, they can never really tell who the true perpetrator is. And a lot of times when they come upon the domestic violence, and they do find that the person that usually gets arrested is the person who is kind of out of control. And it's usually the person who's maybe hysterical, crying, not making much sense. And so, uh, a lot of what happens is that the domestic violence seems to continue because there is absolutely no investigation, as one would find another type of call that would be made to the police for a disturbance. And that's usually what they call it when they first come upon it, is like a disturbance, a domestic disturbance, but they don't give it the term of domestic violence until uh, someone's been arrested, mostly.
I have a
So,
question real quick to tie in with that. For instance, with CPS, if there's ever an allegation of domestic violence, I feel as though the non-perpetrator still gets punished just as much, as far as saying like, well, their failure to protect. But in reality, it's like sometimes the mother is trying to seek a shelter and leave the home and protect the children, but yet they're still kind of putting that or allegation against them and
sure.
punishing them, when yet here they're trying to get away from the situation. So I don't know if you have anything to
Oh,
speak upon that, or.
I have a lot to say about that. Um, so one of my findings in my research, and I do talk about this a lot, is the fact that the domestic violence shelters, they stem from the only way you can get federal funding or state funding in some cases of the large amounts is if you stem from a government association. So being Sweet Corner Girl, I would have to follow government association to gain the millions of dollars that you would get from federal funding for things like domestic violence. So what I have found the funding goes for, and I talk about this, is for training of police officers, court personnel, attorneys, and judges, and also for research. And so that's where you find that women, you know, they're not getting assistance with the courts with legal help, like if they go to a shelter, if they go seek for help, because there's no money. The money's not going for women to leave. And so when women do call these domestic violence shelters, uh, there's they're putting themselves in a position of being charged with failure to protect, because they're left to their own devices and own resources to find a way to leave. And it's kind of like, I wish I didn't do that. I wish I didn't call. Now, they do say that it takes 8 to 13 times for a woman to leave, and that's usually because there is no funding. 99% of the financial problem for a person to leave, and it happens to men too. I'm not going to say that it's just an all woman issue. It happens to both men and women, and I do help both men and women too. So but you know they don't give them the means to leave. It's so that makes it especially if the person is the breadwinner, and they provide, the mother may not have been working, the father may not have been working, and the other person is the sole support of the family. So a lot of times what I've seen is that, small problems become huge mountains, that they have to overcome when someone does make a call to CPS looking for, assistance. We're not looking, a lot of times for problems to be solved, but, my experience has been with myself and with other women who I help, and men too, is they just want the abuse to stop. They really don't. Yeah, that's all they want. When I can tell who's truly.
Tina, real quick, Tina, I think Tiffany might want to say something. So go ahead, Tiffany. Yeah.
I think that, let me fix my camera here. I think that the system fails to understand that a woman, we're talking about women, and the children are most at risk once they leave.
Yeah. The most dangerous time for a woman is when she leaves, or when she's leaving, or when she is left. That's what that's when the time she's going to be most stalked. 84% of the time she's going to be stalked. And the research that I've shown shows that it's mostly the men who are doing the stalking. The physical stalking. I know that there's other avenues now, such as cyber stalking. And one of the things that I try to emphasize on is that our resources really need to go to assist a person at that time. That is the most dangerous time. But unfortunately, how our system is set up is that when a police officer is called, both parties are being told to go file a restraining order. And so it's a matter of who gets to the courthouse first. And it's unfortunate because a lot of times what I'm finding with the women that I've been helping recently is that they're being filed with false allegations. And then when that happens, it takes a life on its own. And usually it's a one-sided rodeo show the whole way through. It's like the other party can never get traction to win at any part of the game, because it's a game. That's what I call it. It's a game. The whole system is illogical. It makes absolutely no sense. And recently, I've been helping a woman who was the stay-at-home mom, and the children are older, which was kind of surprising to me how the court ended up turning out for her. But she had not been in the workforce for many years, and her spouse wanted a divorce. So, I mean, that was a shock to her to begin with, because she wasn't expecting it. And so she tried to go, she's a school teacher, I believe, and she had tried to go get a job. She was in a job, and then he filed a restraining, or it wasn't a restraining, it was a protective order for the children, because he made false allegations that she was evicted from her apartment, which she wasn't. And he went to go, the children were even picked up at this apartment that she was supposedly evicted from. And so what ended up happening was the hearing for I believe it was an evidentiary hearing that she was supposed to have to show that this was not true. And about 4 months had passed, and he had the children all that time. And so uh, when she was able to show that these are false allegations, the court put the court reinstated the 50-50 custody. But then he was doing all these different kinds of things, making these false allegations continually. She also was never able to, because she was getting spousal support because she had not been working. She did have an attorney at the time with the restraining order, or with the beginning of the case. She was able to get child support, and she was able to get spousal support because she had not been working throughout the marriage. And then, but he had it reduced because she didn't have the children for those 4 months. So during that 4 months, it was reduced. And so when she proved that he was not being honest, it was never reinstated to the previous amount. She had lost her job because of all the court hearings that he was having her go to. And so she was still relying on his spousal support, and the child support had dramatically reduced because he had mostly the child, and they never reinstated it. So she is struggling this whole time until the final trial, which was just recently, and she's nervous. She's not represented. The court never granted her the funds to hire an attorney. So she was never able to get counsel. She's going to domestic domestic violence organizations, seeking help. There is no help out there, none, especially for a legal aspect of it. So she's trying to do this by herself. And, by the time she gets close to the court date, she's in a panic, and she sought some mental health help. Well, at trial, he decides that he's going to play that card. And so what happens is, in the courts, they have now, even though she had her children 50-50 for the past 6 months after she was able to prove that he was not being honest about the eviction, now the court he has full custody, and the court has implemented where she has to seek counseling to work on herself, and she also has to go seek a psychiatrist, and they have to, and she has to report to the court. So that is an example of judicial abuse, which I talk a lot about too, where she's never able to gain any footing to be an equal playing ground with him, who has all the finances. He had all the finances. He had all the control of the finances during the marriage. He had all control over it after the marriage. And then he's not even giving her an opportunity to,
defend herself with what little financial support she had. He just kept making her go under.
And the courts it's like the courts don't recognize that aspect of the abuse because, first of all, I mean, I look at it, he committed financial abuse, psychological and emotional abuse, because she was without her children for 4 months until that hearing. His attorney kept delaying it. There was always some sort of reason why they couldn't make it to that court. So more time goes by that she's not with her children. And now,
all because of the eviction that was reported falsely.
Yeah, and it was all by him. It was self-directed by him, and there's absolutely no consequences to him at all. And this happens, and it does happen to men too. It's not just a female thing. But I do see it happen to women. And one of the things that is a myth that we all hear is that women always get custody, and that's not true. The women who get custody are the women who are not married. The women who the father left prior to the child being born. They were never married. So those are the women who are going to get custody because statutorily she is the natural guardian. So of course that makes sense. A lot of men in that position, when they're not married, they don't want the responsibility of the children or the child. And they have to, if they want that aspect, they would have to come forward with a paternity suit, unless they say, I know this is my child, I'm going to go ahead and pay you child support. I'd like to work on a visitation plan. And those are great cases. Those are great people that, can work together and when they have a child. So,
that's one reason I don't like ex partes, because they really do violate the 14th Amendment.
yeah, absolutely. They do.
And if you're a paralegal, and I have a paralegal book, and where it says ex parte in my book, it says unethical.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
I'm going to be listening, but I'm going to turn my camera off just for a second, but just so everyone knows. But I had a question to guide with that real quick. For as far as domestic abuse as well, a lot of the times I feel like, for instance, this situation, the father had all the financial gain to, have his own attorney and kind of win in that matter. But even though it wasn't necessarily a CPS case, it was maybe a family court case. Why still do you think they side with, quote unquote, the perpetrator and still let the children be given or, win in custody for that matter to the abuser, if that makes sense?
Well, part of my research too, I came across, in 1990, Florida had done a study about the biases with the court system with women, and there still is a great bias against women. And it's not maybe the general public, but it's something that's handed down from in the judicial climate. Okay, attorneys learn from attorneys, and before there was no women attorneys. Florida did not have their first woman attorney until 1972, and the laws for domestic violence really weren't even implemented then. The laws for children weren't even implemented then. In 1974, there was the CAPTA laws that were that gave the definition of a child, what a child was, and that was the lesser of the age of 18. And it spelled out the exploitation of children and what they were implementing to prevent the exploitation and abuse of children. And so that's, the women that I've come in contact with it, I do talk about this on my blog and my website, and I think I've written a paper about it. But women basically, I think, to fit in with the male population of, the climate of having mostly men in that profession, they kind of do go along with the good old boy club, the good old boys, to fit in. They want to get that promotion. They want to get the admiration by the other attorneys who've been doing this for 30 years. They want to get that admiration for the judges. So they're not taking a stand and they're not championing in a different direction. And the responsibility of mental health has fallen on women mostly. If you look at the I believe the American Psychological Association, they had on their website, I don't know if they still do because I bring this stuff up, they had 84% of women are more mentally ill than men, but 84% of women are more likely to go ask for help than a man would. So that is the reason why those statistics are there. There's no other reason. I mean, I'm sure that if they were all men going to seek help, that would be a different story. But we all know that most men don't go for psychiatric help or therapy help or any kind of, help, except maybe from their buddies or from friends or what have you, or family, even a trusted family. But mostly women are the ones who say, I'm not feeling so hot. And
Gina, I have, I think you mentioned to me when we were talking earlier today about a story that maybe you wanted to share since we're talking about mental health and the fact that the lady that, I think you know which one I'm talking about. I don't want to tell the whole story with what I'm about to say, but that her mental health got to her at the end, if you know what I mean. Do you want to share that story?
I think I started telling the story. Which one?
The one, well, I guess I've said that took her life because of mental health, correct? Or did you not say that that was why she did? You said you were helping a case, I believe, I thought
Oh, it's
earlier
a man.
today when we were talking.
It's a man.
Oh, it was a man. Okay, well, but it was still with mental health though, right?
Um,
Maybe I misunderstood you. I thought you were going to share a story about how someone you were helping ended up taking their life. Did I not hear you correctly?
no, I'm helping a man who's in trial right now. He lost
Oh,
his
okay.
children.
Maybe I misunderstood.
It's
Okay,
okay.
maybe I misunderstood
No,
you.
that's right. We were talking about a lot of things. So,
I know.
yeah, I mean, no, I'm helping a gentleman who is incarcerated right now. He's in prison. And he had lost his children through CPS.
Okay.
And he struggled for 5 years with it, trying to get them back. And, couldn't, nobody wants to help you. Nobody cares. Nobody cared when I was a child either. But anyway, he just, he couldn't take it, and he wanted to commit suicide, and the police came into his house and shot him. And
Oh, that's what, yeah, I think that's what you
he,
meant. Okay.
he was in a different room than the police were. And they're claiming, and this guy never touched a gun, didn't have any guns in his house. When CPS came and took his children, there was a huge news report. He was the first one here in our community to have an Amber Alert. This was years ago. This is back in early 2000s, right? And they said that he had guns, he had weapons, he had nothing. He's a simple guy, carpenter. He's a very, very highly intellectual person, very smart, very, handyman kind of guy. He's the kind of guy that you call, can you help me move? And he'd be right there with his pickup truck and lunch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so they came into his house and they shot him. And he was in another room. He was behind a door. He was behind a door to the left of the room. And he shot one shot. He was trying to shoot himself. And the police shot him. And he has 2 bullets in his body. They cannot remove it. They cannot remove him, or otherwise he'll lose his life. But he has filed a habeas, and I'm assisting him right now with it. But he filed a habeas because the police fabricated the evidence. And it's clear on the pictures that the state prosecutors have entered into evidence that they fabricated the evidence. They're trying to say that this guy who's never shot a gun before in his life, really, that he was a perfect shot with a 357 on a wall, a perfect shot. If there was a bullseye there, every single one of those shots would have hit the bullseye. And the bullets vanished. Who knows where the bullets are? There's no bullets. There's no bullets in the wall.
So what is he incarcerated for?
Attempted murder of police officer.
Oh my gosh.
3 counts, 78 years. 3 counts.
But they came into his home?
They came into his home, yes.
Without a warrant?
They claim there was without a warrant, but what happened was there was an argument with another family member. It was a male family member. He called. He's the one who called and, concocted a story. And so they came into the house. There was the other person had a cache of guns, a former Vietnam veteran. Had some mental health issues of his own or whatever, and started an argument with this young man. They're relatives, and not father and son, but uncle and nephew. And there was an Amber Alert that was done several years before, 5 or 10 years before, 5 or 6 years before, maybe. And he walked. How this Amber Alert came about was he went to have one of the visits with his children after they took him. He had to go to CPS, or he had to go to DCF, or whatever place that he was going. The person was late. He only was getting an hour, and he wasn't even going to give him the full hour. When he saw his child had bite marks. All three of his children. He is 7-year-old, I believe, and a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old. All three of his children were sent in separate foster care, from what I understand. And his 7-year-old child had bite marks all over his body from another foster child. And he said, "Hey, do you see this? Will you report this? Will you write this down? You make a report of my son's got bite marks all over him." And they refused. They're not going to. Nope, we're not going to do it. And the kids, I believe, came without car seats. They were just put in the car from the CPS worker, whatever. And he ended up taking the children and walking out of CPS.
Oh no.
Yeah. So there was an Amber Alert put out on him, and of course, he went.
It's like, what would any parent do in that kind of situation? They're in desperation of, my child is being abused. I'm bringing it to your attention, and you don't want to do anything about it.
And if that was him, they would have had him, booked and stripped by then, and in jail without even asking what happened. Right.
So after the Amber Alert, they obviously caught up to him, I'm assuming.
Yeah, he went to somebody he thought he could trust, but apparently couldn't trust because they turned him in. But then he went to his court. There was nothing he did wrong, really. Technically, he did nothing wrong because they took his kids wrongfully.
He's taking them back wrongfully.
Yeah. And apparently he didn't show up for a court hearing. And so the only thing that they were being able to get him to plead to, which was failure to appear.
Wow.
So all this time goes by. They know where he lived. He lived in the same place for many years. People knew where he lived. So what they had done was, in this court trial that he, was convicted for, which had nothing to do with the Amber. That's what it started, because he was devastated. He could never pick himself up from losing his children. It was devastating to him. And he ended up losing. He ended up, getting arrested and what have you. He refused to appear for the subsequent hearings or what have you. And, so there was a warrant out for his arrest. But when they came to his house, the police didn't know about this warrant for his arrest when they came into the house. They did that, they said it in court as an after effect, but they did not come to his house to institute a warrant. There was no warrant. You know what I'm saying? They came in the house.
Because the uncle called, right? The uncle
called, right?
Yeah. But then now they're trying to backpedal when they found out he did in fact have a warrant out for his arrest, and then they want to use that as an excuse of why they came.
Exactly. But that
wasn't the case though. Yeah.
It wasn't the case at all. They knew where he was. Even still, I mean, to come into someone's house, guns drawn, when you're instituting a warrant for someone
not showing up,
a non-violent crimes. They were all, none of this was a non-violent crime. So why are you walking to anybody's house with your guns drawn? And I
thought, can't you have a gun to use in self-defense if someone's coming in with a gun? Or no, because they're police officers?
Well, they did announce, I believe, I'm not sure, but they did announce but
who they were and stuff.
Who's announcing what? Who are you?
Yeah.
My house. Is it the radio? Is it TV?
Yeah. And you never know if it's a real cop or not.
Exactly. And why are you coming into someone's house? If my brother was not a dangerous person. This person, he was not dangerous. He's not a dangerous person,
So where are you at with trying to, you said you were kind of trying to help him like fight it in a way. Is there
Yes.
any updates on that perhaps?
Well, he does have trial coming up for his habeas
Mhm.
coming up in April.
Okay.
I believe that there's, it's moving forward.
Can you
He's
explain to our viewers
Sure.
that don't really know what habeas necessarily means in court terminology?
Oh, sure. So he's filed a habeas that the Department of Corrections is wrongfully holding him, wrongfully he
Okay.
was wrongfully incarcerated
Uh-huh.
for a crime that he did not commit. Um, so he's, uh, asking for uh, his release, his immediate release because of the falsification of evidence, because the evidence was falsified. Um, One of the big factors in a habeas for most cases is ineffective counsel.
Mm.
Uh, but we find what I found with most public defenders is that they're not at all assisting
They're
people.
not in it to win for you because they're working for the state. I mean,
Exactly. I don't know. I'm not going to go as far to say they're working for the state. I don't know who they're working for, but they're certainly not.
well, they're working for somebody that's behind you as far as not on your team, I would say.
No,
You
So,
know,
they,
how old are his kids now?
they're adults.
oh,
Do they blame him?
Uh, I, I don't even know. Um, the the they he's never had any contact with the children, and
wow.
Well, if he does, they
sure.
can sue for wrongful removal.
Well, what happened was it was, which I see a lot in cases with CPS involvement. Um, and I did talk about this with one of my cases. Um, and I helped someone recently about this case. But there was no, the mother sought psychiatric help, some therapy or whatever for other reasons other than domestic abuse. And so once she became well, I guess, I don't know, the children were given to her, and it was probably because of all the media attention this case got at the time. I'm not really sure. Um, but the children were given to that other parent.
Hmm.
So, but he was denied all access to the children. And it was all
Wow.
based on false news reports, really. There was news reports that, the children were living in a dangerous environment and what have you. They weren't in school. Um, but the children were 7, 3, and 4, and there's no requirement for them to be in school at that age. The
Not
children
to
were not
shift topics, Tina, if I could interrupt you real quick, but we have about 20 minutes left, and I kind of wanted you to touch a little bit about the story that you had touched on earlier about you working as a paralegal underneath a CPS attorney, if I remember correctly, that actually fought a case and won. I'm not sure if I'm saying this one right, but do you maybe want to talk about that a little bit for the last 20 minutes?
sure. Well, what he did was he sued DCF for children who were abused in DCF custody.
Okay.
So that children who were sexually abused. We had one child who was shaken baby um, by the foster mom. There was children who were brought into TCF custody because the father had been trafficking them, and the children, the girls, they were young girls. I mean, they were teenagers, um, and they were sexually molested by the foster father. And that was an interesting case because the girls were first trafficked by their father, and they were from another country, and that's how they came into CPS custody, was because it was learned that their own father, was trafficking them.
And then they get placed into a foster home that the father there then does the same
Oh,
exact thing.
see, yes, and the problem with,
Oh.
I'm going to make this very clear. I hope I can make this clear because I've had a lot of experience with these young women in the foster care system. When a child is in that foster care system, for whatever reason, they become more vulnerable to everybody, not just to the system, but to everybody, because everybody thinks of them as a lesser person. They're not going to amount to much. They're not that smart. They think that a child who's been bounced around from school to school to school to school, which happens in most foster cares, is not that smart. They don't grasp things, but that's not true. The opposite is actually true, because these young people have to adjust themselves to different people at different times, so they're more acute than you are, believe it or not.
It's funny you say that.
Sure.
I love my neighbor.
Mhm.
At the bus stop this morning, we got into a heated argument about foster care.
Sure.
Okay. She's like, oh my God, I know some really good foster parents. I said, do your research, because that is not a safe place.
Right.
Those children need to remain in the home. They are 600 times more likely to be trafficked, murdered. No.
Sure.
The whole neighborhood heard me out front this morning.
They probably hear me too.
I said, you need to watch my podcast because you need some education.
Yes, absolutely. They are 10 times more vulnerable than any other anybody
Child.
else.
Yeah.
And part of it too is, if children are the most are the biggest victims in our society. Children
Yeah.
are. And so when they're not with a parent who cares for them, or loves them, or where they know where they are. I mean, children who are taken out of their parents' custody, it's traumatic.
Yes.
It's a very traumatic event. And one of the things I learned, because I had to go through training. I didn't have to go through training. The attorney that I worked for used to allow me to go to training for whenever CPS or DCF had their workshops or whatever. So I used to get to go, and I'm listening to this seminar, and I actually this was years ago, but it's so very true because it still goes on today. They talked about children being medicated, and they had over 30% of the children being medicated on psychotropic drugs,
Yes.
heavy drugs. They're being diagnosed as schizophrenic. They're being diagnosed as, bipolar. And I asked the doctor, because they actually had the doctor speaking, and I said, do you not treat these children for PTSD? Is there any one of them? He's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, this is like traumatic. And it's like, children who are acting out like that because you're a stranger to them. I don't care who you are. You are a stranger to that child. And that child is going to do what anybody else is going to do, is fight, flight, or freeze. And they're going to fight you. And, if you can't handle that, you're not equipped to be with that child. That's how I look at it. And you're just not equipped. You have no idea what you're doing if you are taking a child from their parent and expecting that child to be well-mannered. It's got nothing to do with their upbringing. It's got to do with what you're doing to that child. It's, who are you?
I couldn't imagine being an adult and being placed into a strange home with these stranger type parents, and I mean everything, and yet it's a child. I mean,
right. And I don't understand these reunification. What is with reunification? What is the purpose of it? You don't reunify a child with a foster parent. You know what I'm saying? You don't give them this. We're gonna slowly walk you into this system. We're gonna dump you in that system. But then when it's time to give your child back, or to get your child back, there does not need to be a reunification. If anything, there should be a huge party. Okay, let's have a huge big one blowout party. But we don't have to give you, there's no, let's reunify you with these, little visits. It's not necessary.
Exactly.
necessary. It's just doesn't make sense. It's just one more thing where someone else is in your psyche, your mental health. It's not good for anybody's well-being to be in that position where, you're being stalked. You know what I mean? You're being stalked. You're being researched is what it is. What if I mean, it seems like what they do is they try to do the most devastating thing to families and children so that they can write about, okay, how does this parent react? How does this parent react?
Funny you say that too. It's like the typical when the mother goes into court, if she's not crying because she's trying to keep her composure and
Which is
act professional, they say that, oh, the mother doesn't care enough. But then if the mother comes in crying and very emotional, because it is, then they say that the mother is, what's the word that they use, like basically mental and just
stability.
all naked, yeah, like not stable and can't keep it together. Well, gee, take your kids away and see how you react. But either way, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because they never want to give you your kids back to begin with. It's like once they take them from day one, like Mr. Davis, the attorney that I do this platform under, has said that they have an agenda way before you ever even clue into what's going on, let alone fight. It's like they already know what the end game is. And you're lucky if you even just kind of make it through to maybe keep the visits going or whatnot. Like my case was open for a little over 2 years and our visits never liberalized. We had the same visitation we had from day one till 2.5 years later. They never wanted to get us any further because again, they already knew what their agenda was. And it's it's very unfortunate. But Darren, you haven't really said much over there. You're kind of nodding off. Did
I'm just over here reading. No, I've got plenty of stuff that I've been reading about.
Well,
What do you
because
think
we have about
the Nichols?
13 minutes left. So go ahead.
All right, so we're talking about all this stuff, but let's talk about when we go to court. What about the Nicholson standards? How do you feel about those, and how do you feel that? Do you think they use those enough? Do you think those are brought up
Are you
enough in
talking
the
to me?
courts? Yeah, well, anybody
I'm
in this
not
courts,
familiar
yeah.
with Nicholson standards. I'm not.
So
I'm sorry.
it's a standard. It's a standard set forth a while back. Well, geez, the 90s, I believe, or whatever. That they have to meet certain clauses before they remove a child out of a home, because this is a big deal with domestic violence and removing children from home, because these kids don't always see domestic violence, or the
Right.
domestic violence isn't at a level that it should be, that they need to be removed. So
Sure.
they came up with a standard of it, and they don't use this in courts enough. I don't think so anyway. Like I found it in something, and then Tiffany had heard about it, but I don't see any courts using it. I was trying to look for it over here a minute ago to get the actual what the four pieces of the breakdown were, but well, let me get that for you so you can know exactly what it is.
Basically, the Nicholson case says domestic violence alone is not enough to remove a child from the parents.
Yes. Well, the problem with that's been happening that I've been talking about is the fact that they're trying to pass laws like Grayson's law, Caden's law, and those types of laws, which I will not lobby for any legislator. I used to work for a senator. That was where I first started in my legal degree, in my legal, experience. And most laws, when they're first written in a bill, before they go through committees and stuff, they usually say one different thing. And then after it's gone through committee, things are added, things are deleted, and it doesn't look anything like what it used to when you first had it written. One of the things that disturbed me when I was reading about first, it could have changed for all I know since the first was written, but there's a clause there for CPS to come into your home and take your children if there's any call to the police for domestic violence and and domestic abuse. It doesn't even have to be violence. And this is why I don't really lobby laws, because I really don't think that we really know what we're doing. Most people don't know what they're doing. They get onto a quote unquote grassroots and they really don't know what they're fighting for. They don't know who they're supporting. And it's it's not something that I take like I don't take it lightly. I want to know who you want me to sign a petition. What am I signing? And if you give me if you give me less than a researched essay, I don't think I'm going to sign your petition, because I want to know, where does it stem from? who, what's behind it, because when you pass a law that affects that to help one set of people, you're usually hurting a big set of another people. And a lot of what I found with these laws that are being instituted are, people are asking to be put forth. There's already laws in place that are protecting us, and the problem is that the judges are not interpreting those laws, and they're not being interpreted. One of the reasons why, if you read the CAPTA law that was first put in place in 1974 for the exploitation and abuse of children, it basically says in there, and I think it's part 62. I could be wrong. It's in my website. You can go look at my blog. I write about it a couple places, but it says that one of the biggest things is to reunify, and it's family focused. It's to reunify families. If there's a problem within the family, you find out what that problem is, you get to the bottom of it, you fix it, and you keep that child, who in that family, and you work on it. And I've written about that, where children, I write a lot about teens also, teens who are get in trouble for status crimes, stuff that but for the fact that they're under 18, they wouldn't have been arrested for, open container, smoking, stuff like that, and they're being put into these, institutions for like 15 months because they were caught smoking or they were caught drinking, and they have these long drawn out, incarcerations in a juvenile detention center because, but for their age, it wouldn't be a crime. You know what I mean? So, everything that I've learned and I've read about the law was to make things better, not to put families and people into these positions where they're serving these long prison sentences or being kept from their children. The whole purpose of the laws when they were first instituted in 1974 was to keep families together. And I mean, they can compile the data. It allows for data to be compiled, but every social service that was supposed to be implemented was to be of service to families, was to assist families, and, we can go back even further as to why these laws were put in place. And that was, children were taken from homes, years and years ago. Also, my great grandmother had both her children taken away. My grandfather was in DCF custody along with his brother for many years. And my grandmother was allowed to choose one child to take out because she didn't have enough money. And she chose my grandfather only because he was the younger one, and she felt like he needed her more. But
that never makes sense to me. How can you be a good enough mother for one child, but not for all of them?
Right. And it created such a rift in our family. You could feel it. And I didn't even really know my Uncle Chris. Excuse me. But, I lost my train of thought, and I'm sorry.
I know, sorry, I interrupted you, but
okay.
not to be a damper, but we have about 5 minutes left, and I know we can always have you come on again in the future because there was other stories that I wanted you to touch on. But in the last 5 minutes or so, maybe you want to promote your website, and then Darren and Tiffany then kind of share yours with any viewers that are watching. So Gina, if you want to start with yours.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate that you've given me the opportunity to talk about this. This is really something near and dear to my heart. I wanted to be an attorney when I was younger, but I honestly had to go through so much being told that I was not going to amount to anything, that I wasn't that smart, even though my grades reflected that I made great grades. And then, as I got older and I was, married and going through domestic abuse and violence, I still wasn't able to finish my education. I was left to my own device. I had to find my own way to get to through college and what have you. And I wasn't getting much support, so I didn't end up going back to get my degree for bachelor's degree until I was 50.
Mm.
So I got that just recently. But I actually wanted to be an attorney to help young people like me, because, I was in foster care for a short time. And I ended up, when I was in high school, staying with a family who was not in the foster care system. It was just a private family who, I don't believe I would have finished high school if I didn't have, intervention at that time, just because of the situation with my family, my mother, who, my mother was ill a lot. She had, and I wanted my mother to get help. I certainly did not want my mother, in distress. I don't think any child does. In fact, when I was in foster care, and I talk about this because I was in a foster group home, every kid that I talked to, all of them were just saying, where's my mom? I want my mom to come get me. I wish she'd just get off drugs. I know she can do it. And, I wish they would just come visit me. I wish they would just come, but they also believe, and they truly, truly believe that DCF is doing everything they can to help their parent. They really
And they're
do.
not.
They're
They're
not.
doing everything to keep them from going back home.
But
And that's the sad thing.
the kids truly believe that, they're going to,
Go home.
Yeah. And they do believe that their parent is doing that.
And it's sad because they're doing everything to prevent them, like not like I've heard stories of parents or children being told that you're not having a visit today because the parent didn't want to see you, or vice versa. You're not having a visit with your child because the child says they don't want to see you anymore, when none of that is true.
It's not true. It's a psychiatric.
But that's kind of what I wanted you to talk on if you come again on my show, is more details about your experience in foster care. But talk about your website real quick before we end the show.
Sorry about that. Well, I have Sweet Corner Girl, and I have a lot of essays that I uploaded that I wrote in while I was in getting my degree. I talk about some of the cases that I've worked on just recently. I wrote a letter to the public defender's office. Some people like to call it public pretender.
Pretenders.
Yeah, I like that. The person I'm helping with right now, he is the one who said that to me all the time, and I would just have to laugh every time. So, but I wrote a letter to the public defender's office once when I had a case just recently with a young woman who was involved with CPS. And as far as I know, she's still going through the court system, but the case has been on pause for a while.
Do you want to give your contact info too, as far as how? I know you want to keep telling your story, and I want you to keep telling it, but
we talk about myself.
I know, but the time strain with my producer, I know that we can't really go over. So your website, you've said, but then if you want to give any kind of phone number or other ways of contacting you, because maybe people in your state, Connecticut, right?
Connecticut, yep.
Okay, so go ahead, your name and whatever.
Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts area. I'm nationally.
Do you want to give your phone number out or no?
Sure, it's on my website.
Okay, perfect.
860-975-8899. Sweet Corner Girl.
Okay.
You can find me, Sweet Corner Girl Corp. There's a girl with I had this made by one of the people that I'm assisting. They made
That's
this.
nice. Yeah, I like that.
I love it, and I hope to get more made. But
Darren does a lot of kind of illustration background. However, maybe you want your website to be a little vamped up, if you mean. I don't know. I'm kind of promoting Darren without asking for permission, but
I need to do. I had to get another website because I've had issues with somebody saying that I was not complying. So I had to redo my Facebook. I lost a lot of friends. I don't have many followers. I don't have any people liking my page. Please go to my page and my Facebook page, Sweet Corner Girl, give it a like. I try to incorporate my blog onto my Facebook. My Instagram is still there from 2021, I believe. A lot of my posts are still there. I didn't have to remove that, but I did have to restart on Facebook because they basically shadow banned me. They won't let me boost myself in there because
they don't want the truth to be out there.
I had a group of people just say that I was not following standards, and
Yeah.
it's not true. I mean, there's not. I don't swear. I don't talk. I don't name names. I don't talk bad about people, except about the institution and the system as a whole, So.
Well, in the future, hopefully we'll have you on again. Darren, real quick, do you want to promote yours and Tiffany's other shows linked with CPS?
Yeah, well, I mean, go ahead, Tiff. You want to do it?
I'm tired. It's Tiff and the Punisher. We're on Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern time.
And then you'll find Darren's other shows underneath the platform, right? All the other ones with your other hosts.
Yeah, we got, what do we have? 7 different shows that go 24 hours a day. So, and we're trying to get more people out. We're trying to produce more shows. So if anybody has show ideas and they want to come onto our network, then you're more than welcome to get on there and be a host, do the shows.
He wants to
you already got
Gina's information.
Yep, Gina's. All right, I got it.
All right.
Domestic violence would be the topic. Okay, well, I know Grace is probably telling me that it's over. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in and watching. We'll be back here again next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And again, anybody that wants to be a guest on any of my future shows, you can always call into the number there on the bottom right-hand corner, the 888 number. And my producer, Grace, will hopefully get you scheduled for an upcoming show. Other than that, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you, Tiffany, Gina, and Darren. I appreciate it.
All right.
Have a good night. We'll be in contact, Gina.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.